This week brought to you by Paragon Roofing BC, paragonroofingbc.ca, commercial, residential, repair estimates, free estimates. Go there. They're great sponsors, great roofers. And with this rain we've had lately and more on the way, Lord knows you need a good roof. Let's get into, I suppose, what...
Let's not be navel gazing, Paul. No navel gazing.
No, I'm just thinking, like, I don't want to make a lot out of this Elias Pettersson, Rick Tocchet comments, but the fact that that's all we've had, that's sort of not even negative, but the only, like, just a tiny hiccup. It's laughable to me considering what we've been through for the last 7-8 years with this team. You know, not a great game from a star player. Coach makes a comment. Story is written. Is it a backtrack from Tochhet on that? Are they worried about a reaction from Pettersson, or take me to the center of all this?
I don't think he went out of his way to comment. You know, he was asked about sort of the noise that came with it. And, you know, I mean, I put together this really interesting piece that will probably be the piece that people are looking at as this video comes on, about Tochhet and his ability to listen, and the way but also the way he speaks honestly with his players. You know, Dakota Joshua, obviously probably the first example this season of a guy who heard from his coach essentially public expression of disappointment in the player. You know, JT Miller, who at one point was benched, you know, like Elias Pettersson, I didn't speak to for the story, but, Nikita Zadorov, who came here from somewhere else, who's played for 8 coaches in 5 different teams. Daryl Sutter was, you know, his last or second to last coach in Calgary, a guy who's seen all different approaches and saying how much he values the way Rick is direct to his players. You know, so to go back to Thursday or Wednesday, you know, in the end, he's asked by Farhan Lalji, do you think Petey didn't have a very good game? Because Farhan didn't think he had a very good game, and I think the feeling upstairs was, hey, it was not a vintage Pettersson game, and he said he wasn't very good. And I basically said, you know, I was the next person, and I followed up and said, well, what can he do better? And he basically said, you know, he needs to skate harder, basically. Skate faster, I think it was his feeling. Move faster. And, you know, it was a bit of a criticism. He hasn't been good for 3 or 4 games. It was, you know, an observation of a quality. It was an honest observation of a quality player. And I think, you know, inevitably with a star player like that, you are going to take note of comments about such a player. So, I mean, I wrote a little story, said he called on him to be better. Other people wrote on it. You know, oddly enough, the most sort of critical headline probably was the Sportsnet headline written off their desk, I think, back east. You know, somebody wasn't even in the market, which, you know, in the end, how it goes, like the noise out there. Listen, he had his reaction to what our reaction was. It was a bit of feedback from him. I think it was a reasonable back and forth. Like, I don't think anybody's to blame here. I think it's just him saying, listen, the player didn't have a very good game. I was asked about it. I said he didn't play very well. He hadn't been playing in a couple more games, but he'll be fine. And that's, you know, in the end, if you read my story at the end, I said, watch out NHL, because basically he's saying my guy's going to be even better than he's been. Like,
I was gonna raise that with you. If we know anything about Pettersson, it's that put a bit of a chip on his shoulder and give him something to prove, and you tend to see a little bit of an elevation. So I'm not suggesting that you go out of your way to fraudulently find ways to motivate him, but when this stuff does happen, you tend to see results, don't you?
Yeah, and you know, listen, Pettersson's proud. He's a proud player. He knows he hasn't been playing well, you know.
Has he not been playing well, Patrick, or has he just not been hitting the heights he was hitting earlier in the season?
I mean, they're still producing, right? Like, this is the wild thing, is that, like, of all the players who haven't been scoring, it has not been JT Miller and has not been Elias Pettersson. It's certainly Miller, when we asked, you know, has been banging the drum all week. Like, listen, I have not been playing very well. Pettersson, who, you know, I think it's a little, I mean, Miller's always willing to talk. Pettersson's less willing. I mean, he'll talk. We ask for him, but is more guarded. And, you know, Brock Besser hasn't scored in 6 games, you know, was asked a bit about that on Wednesday, you know, missed a wide open net basically. And, you know, he said, listen, you know, he was upset he didn't score. He loves scoring goals. That's why he's there. But he tried to go philosophical. Listen, I'm still getting chances. Listen, I think Pettersson was not good on Wednesday, right? Like, he played with Mikheyev and Kuzmenko, the 2 guys he was supposed to be there at the beginning of the season with. A line that they've gone away from because I think it has not fired the way we want to fire. because if you want to talk about players who really aren't playing well, I mean, talk about Ilya Mikheyev. He hasn't scored in 16 games. Like, he exists. He's been getting time on the power play. He's been playing lots with Elias Pettersson. And he's still not scoring. So, to me, that is funny. As well as the Canucks have been doing, points in 10 straight games, 8-0-2. There's a lot of sort of bumps in this lineup right now, and I don't think anybody's instinct was that Elias Pettersson is a big, huge problem. And I think, to go back to your original question, that's probably some of what Tocchet's point was. Like, listen, he's still like a top player. He just hasn't been as great as he's been. It was in relative terms. There are other players. He went, later on in the press conference after the game, like, he went on and on and on about turnovers, and all of us understood who he was talking about. He was talking about Andrei Kuzmenko. And that's been a regular talking point, is the quality of play. So, at the same time, I would probably say that, I mean, I wasn't there. I wasn't able to be there yesterday doing family stuff. But, I would have said, listen, Rick, like, I don't think any of us took it as anything more than you saying, listen, he hasn't been great this week. I think it was written as such. I don't think, I certainly didn't say you blasted him. I said you just called him to be better. Yeah, that's all we said.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
I think it's the classic Tempest and Teapot. Like, it's literally not, and it's not going to be a discussion point again. It probably wouldn't have been a discussion point if Tocchet hadn't been asked about it yesterday, and he was. So.
Allow me to meander a little bit here. Much like I'm sure people do when they're watching these videos, there was a time not too long ago when I was in my car and I was listening to sports radio, and Thomas Drance was comparing the Canucks to Liverpool, because Liverpool had won the English Premier League. I was screaming, absolutely screaming at the radio, and I believe I interacted with them over this. Like, Liverpool have won 6 Champions Leagues and 19 league championships. The Canucks have won precisely 0.
Zero. But 2, come on, Paul, 2 Presidents trophies.
Well, if it was held to the same esteem as the league, but bear with me here. But one of the reasons why Liverpool in that drought were maybe comparable, ignoring the history, where they had chased the star player and they had gone after big names and inevitably hadn't won, and then that player wants out and you begin again. So I reference this because the manager of my team, Jurgen Klopp, announced shockingly that he is leaving the team at the end of the season. And of course, everyone are giving him these plaudits. Now, this is ironic, and there's a confluence here because, my other team, the Bengals, lost their offensive coordinator. I am going somewhere with this that does relate to the Canucks, so bear with me. Their offensive coordinator, Brian Callahan, was unveiled yesterday as the head coach in Tennessee, and he actually quoted Klopp, which instantly made me think of this year's Canucks. And so he said, this quote is not for me. I don't want to steal it. This comes from an English soccer coach, Jurgen Klopp. Okay. The quote is, when you agree on a common idea and work towards it together, then you can create something very special. That is what I believe in, and that's what we'll do here. And that's what he did do. He broke a 30-year drought. They won the league championship. He's got to 3 Champions League finals. They've won 1, picked up a litany of other trophies. So, I'm not going to say in hindsight Drance was right, but this is something that stuck out to me about this regime of the Canucks. Now, you have this great feature coming this weekend on Rick Tocchet, but it did get me thinking about the Alvin, Rutherford, Tocchet triumvirate. No one liked how Bruce Boudreau was treated last year. And again, blame on that falls on ownership for putting the cart before the horse, so to speak. But give ownership credit that when they got it right and they gave leeway to the guy that they brought in Rutherford to bring in Alvin, bring in Tocchet, these guys are on the same page, and I think we're seeing results from that now. So my idea is you're not just chasing like, oh, we want Milan Lucic. Milan Lucic signed with the Flames. We're going to get Louis Eriksson because he's the next guy. The biggest, the hottest free agent is Tyler Myers. Let's sign him and we'll overpay for it. Let's get OEL and make that trade. It was all like, let's get a player, let's make a splash, instead of having this philosophy. And I think it's, when you look at sports, and I don't care what sport it is, it's all applicable when it comes to competition. If you have an ownership that aligns with management, that aligns with coaching, that aligns with a playing philosophy, you are invariably successful. How much credit do you give basically the organization for what's happened this year, or is this just kind of a lucky confluence of events?
I mean, first of all, look at that, throwing it back to Scotty and company, like a great long rant on the radio from Paul Chapman here. You're totally right. The alignment element is super important in this, and that extends to the players, right? Like Tochhet. So much I realized in assembling the story was thinking about how do you get players to buy in? How do you get them to do, or how do you get them to think, and it's not just do what you want them to do, but to think in the same way you think. And so much of what Tochhet has done is sat back and listened. And I went and read an item from the Harvard Business Review about listening. Obviously for corporate leaders, but there's lessons for all leaders. And they looked at a whole bunch of studies and a whole bunch of data and did some research themselves, and recognized that the most sort of the greatest impact you can have as a leader is to listen, but to listen intently and consciously and actively to the person you're talking with. And it is very clear that that's something that Tochhet does. And I think, certainly in the messaging that we get from Rutherford and from Alvin to a lesser extent, but certainly from Rutherford, is the same thing. That there is this recognition that stuff, you're obviously in charge, you're the one who has to make the decision, but the idea that you can make the decision in isolation from everything else and hope to get it right is foolish. And that certainly was, as you've noted, too often, I think, the problem with how things were going from at various stages from 2014, I would say, until 2021, when the Benning era finally came to an end. Now, obviously, Trevor Linden came in. There was a notion of we're going to do things different, but Trevor Linden never run. He never served in this kind of position really before. He was starting behind the eight ball. Benning was used to kind of doing his thing. It was very, he was a guy who had run a scouting department, had been sort of that super scout. Whether it was a successful way to do it or not isn't clear, but that's how he'd always done things. He wasn't going to change. And so the contrast is now how we understand how the team has run itself and how it's been effective, and the coherent plan and the idea, like you said, you're not okay. You didn't get this guy. What are you gonna do next? Who's next on your list? If you can't get this guy, what's your plan B? And they're like Milan Lucic and Louis Eriksson. You could not find two more different players. Yep. And so if you're identifying Milan Lucic as the guy you want, well, why do you want him? Well, okay, if you can't do that, then what's your next option? Like, why is Louis Eriksson your next option? Well, it was because he was the next big name available.
Want to make a splash. Want to be noticed. There wasn't a
coherent idea to it, and to go to Klopp. Like Klopp is such a great example of like understanding the overall project, and how do I make this happen? And how do I emphasize this? And how do I optimize this? So. Yeah, that is so much of the story here. And like, Quinn Hughes had such a great quote. Like he said to me that he thinks 70% of the credit of the turnaround over the last year is on the coaching staff. Just the way they are, the way they prepared themselves, the way they prepared the players, the way they connect with the players. I put that notion to Tyler Myers, who absolutely, Tyler Myers, wrote a thing yesterday on Thursday about Myers, but the Myers Renaissance, which mostly is not like he's kind of been the same. We've just perceived him differently.
They're not losing
on the role. But they're not losing. But also he really is making fewer mistakes. Part of it is because he's playing less, right? But
we do always look for scapegoats or scape giraffes, if the case may be, and those the criticism, like the Canucks, the fan base, whether and the media, whether it matters or not, there's always a whipping boy, right? Like I think in any team that happens. That's not. But when someone has a high price tag, again, chasing a free agent, and the results aren't good, that's why, right? So I think you're absolutely right. He's not playing as much, but it's still winning cures those things.
Yeah, exactly. And as a result, there's a reason why they're winning, which is that the players are being used, to better advantage and on and on and on. Tyler Myers told me, like he said, I understand what I'm doing better. Like everybody understands what they're doing better. Everything makes sense. And you've been a coach. We all know as a coach that like the players need to understand that you have success when your players understand, when they connect with what you're trying to say. And there have been, the coaches who don't succeed are the coaches who fail at that. And organizationally, that works up as well. And so, this is the story. You can go back to the Rutherford announcement last week. The owner came out, we had not seen a lot of him, and now we've seen him, twice in 2.5 years. And he talked about the fans. I think that was the one bit of messaging that, there's not a lot they've gotten right over the years, but hiring Rutherford was the right move. And I would say the messaging, that he was, I tried to ask him about, what in hindsight was it that sold Rutherford the most. And he talked about the buzz and wanting to get the fans. And that was a smart decision on his part. Just talk about how excited. He talked about him being a fan of the team. He tried to put himself in the fans' shoes and say, listen, this is why I'm excited. This guy's awesome. I think this guy's great. Of course he wanted to pat himself on the back because in the end he made the hire, and that's fair enough. But he mostly talked about the fans, and that was to his credit. And you only hope that the mentality carries on, and that Jim Rutherford is able to keep that mentality going forward, and make sure the owner understands that that's what you got to focus on. That at the end of the day, that they're your fans. Yes, they're your customers, but more than anything, they are the energy. They are why people discuss your team, and it's all about keeping them happy and meeting people who aren't necessarily in the building every game, keeping everybody around it happy. And they're winning. That's the best way to do it.
They are winning, Patrick. And normally at this point in the video, we would talk about how many games the team's going to win next. So at the time of recording, they only have one in the next week. But it is something that I didn't quite realize as much when we talked about this previously at Christmas. I've been living in Vancouver since 1974, and all I ever remember is how the Canucks, part of the reason why they never won was the schedule was so terrible, and they had so much more travel than other teams. Well, thank goodness the team is good this year, because they would be wasting one hell of a schedule otherwise.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like it. I mean, we talked about how at Christmas, they played at home before Christmas, played at home after Christmas, and they didn't have the last day that games were on and first day they're back. They had a nice extended break. Now, there are teams playing until around the rest of the league until Wednesday. After Saturday, the Canucks don't play right through the All-Star break until the following Tuesday. Yeah. How did this happen? Rutherford, has someone been lobbying the NHL head office? Because the way this schedule has sat up for them is really amazing. They should be able to manage this and not be fatigued at all when you get down the stretch, especially with this much of a cushion.
The first thing to understand is that I can't remember how many seasons we've been doing this now, but for some time now, the NHL has intentionally built out a bye week for all teams around the All-Star game, and most teams, you can go look. I'm looking at the information right now from the NHL, but the bulk of the league takes the week off. So the Canucks play
Saturday.
On Saturday. And the bulk of the league tracks with them, that they're off from January 28th till February 5th. There are a few teams, there's a handful of teams that go the other way, that there are breaks after the All-Star game. Oddly enough, somehow, I don't quite understand, the Sharks are off for 13 days. I mean, they're probably going to really be happy to have that time off, given how bad their season's been, but the Sharks are off from February 1st to February 13th. But yeah, the Canucks get this break. You're right, and the schedule. I mean,
but it's not just the break though, Patrick. It's the fact that they're at home when the break hits. Well, they haven't. They're coming off a 5-game. It'll be a 5-game homestand where there were no back-to-backs. They haven't had a back-to-back since the Jersey or since the Rangers Islanders, which is, that's basically no travel involved. So I'm just when you look at all the arduous travel excuses they've had in the past. Like I said, I've never, when you put Christmas into the mix, fatigue cannot be an excuse for this team.
A huge element. So yeah, I mean, there's a few things to understand. First of all, the Canucks have generally always asked to have more home games at the second half of the season than the beginning. They've always had a feeling that at least in this market, that late season games tend to do better. Of course, they were always hoping, and hope, remember, was always the plan, They were hoping to make the playoffs and they'd have a run in and so on and so on. So it didn't work, but generally that's what they've been. In general, they've asked for an opening season road trip to serve two purposes. One, there's sort of that belief in team bonding. And second, this is a team that knows, the organization that's always known they have to travel a lot. And so no matter who's been in charge, I think they've sort of felt, let's try to get as many road games out of the way at the beginning of the season as possible. Of course, this season, like the last few seasons, there have been renovations ongoing underneath, in the event level at the Canucks, Rogers Arena. So this year, for instance, they continued. There's the renovations of the team area is still ongoing. Like they're building a new door into the hallway that leads to the dressing room and the workout areas and all that. But they built that lounge that's between the President's Club, that's between the two dressing rooms, that has obviously that open space of the VIPs, the fancy fans down there can see the players walk out. So that was ongoing even at the beginning of the season. I think it was a bit of a rush to certainly they had ended up having a soft launch, like they didn't even actually have a full launch for the first home opener. So there's a few different reasons. And then yes, as I noted before, like no team had played more games in the NHL than the Canucks at Christmas. They played a ton of hockey. They played a lot of hockey in November and December, and now they're benefiting. That if you're looking for a sort of a sports science angle to this, they are actually going to have a chance. Most teams start running into injury troubles around game 65. And it's just a fatigue issue. Like they have no time to recover. The fact that Canucks are going to get all this time, and then even in this schedule, as you've noted, they obviously have some road games when they come back. But on the whole, February, March into April, they're mostly at home. There's not a lot of travel. Yeah. There's I think 2 or 3 back-to-backs left.
There's 3 back-to-backs, but what stands out to me is one of them is even they play an 11 a.m. game in Minnesota on a Monday, and then they play at 6 o'clock in Denver the following day. So even then you've got more of a buffer than you normally would. My whole point is every year there's vagaries around the schedule, but when you look at how the breaks have set up for this team, and you look at how they're performing, it's just like everything seems to be coming together. And people were joking a month, 2 months ago about, look, they're going to make the playoffs. Isn't this great? But let's not call them a cup contender yet. I wouldn't even put the caveat stranger things have happened at this point, right? Like the Detroit Lions are playing for their chance to go to their first Super Bowl ever. Hats off to our old colleague Howard Samara, has been a lifelong, like this is a sports. You get locked into certain narratives, and sometimes like they'll change on you just like that. And that's where I'm saying with this team, like there's a lot of things going in their favor. Now, having said that, maybe they play the Oilers in the first round and the Oilers haven't lost a game from now until the end of the season. Right. Who knows? But I think things are just teeing up remarkably well for this to be a very special year for the Vancouver Canucks.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's going to be fun. Every year I've been on this, I've said it's never been boring. And this year has been no different, except that this year has been for good reasons.
I can remember a couple of boring years not too long ago, but maybe that's more of an off-season conversation.
On ice, yeah. But I'm just saying, like there was
the drama off the ice for sure.
Always things going on, but right now it's never not boring because the team's playing so well.
Yeah. Okay, Patrick, thanks for that this week. We'll have to manufacture something. We'll have something historic next week to look back on.
You should get All-Star John Garrett to come on or something like that. You can tell a story once again about how he was last-minute choice despite never having actually played a game for the Canucks. But he got to go to the All-Star game in 1980, whatever it was.
Oh, that was fabulous. 80. Yeah, when Brodeur got injured and they had to have a rep and wasn't another player worthy. Yeah. So and then he looked like he was going to win the car, and then Gretzky exploded in the third period. But thanks to Paragon Roofing, paragonroofingbc.ca if you want for all your roofing needs. Thanks for this. I'm loving your comments, by the way. The number of people did comment on the YouTube version of our video last week that they would easily sell their soul for 10 bad years of Canucks if they could just win one cup, which is sort of the way I look at it. I think if you got a couple of championships in the bank and then you're looking at like, oh, do I want that chase every year? I think people here just want one that'd sell their soul for it. So that's it for this week. We will talk to you next week. Thanks, everyone.